very good afternoon to all of you. I'm here today with one of the best personnels in Sri Lanka, a marine biologist and educator. I hope all of you know her if you look at her face. Yes, no doubt. Welcome you, ma'am. Dr. Asha de Vos is here today with us.
Thank you.
With a talk, and hope we can get a lot of things from her. Yes.
Yeah.
So, to give an initiative to the talk, let's start with your childhood.
So my childhood was wild. I grew up, basically my pets, my brother and I, we had lots of pets, but not the kind of pets that you think about every day. We had caterpillars and scorpions and grasshoppers in our bedroom. But we grew up around nature. We were very much, we loved climbing trees. We were always outdoors. That was the way I grew up. And I think that's where sort of my love for just the great outdoors in general started. But also I think my love for science, because, we were watching like caterpillars turn into butterflies, and that was a science lesson, but we didn't know it was a science lesson, right? You see fireflies and then, our parents would tell us, oh, they're glowing, this is why they're glowing. So I think it was just that passive learning of science that made me really excited and curious about like the natural world. So yeah, I think that's kind of where that whole love for it began, and then it sort of grew. I used to go to the museum where there's that beautiful blue whale skeleton that I'm hoping many people have seen, and I used to lie under it and I used to wonder like, wow, this is such an incredible animal. So that was pretty, for me, that was kind of this thing. I would lie under it and be like, it's an amazing animal, but like, what is it, right? Because it's so huge, and like, what does it look like? Because there are just bones. And then, all these things that started growing in my mind. I fell in love with water. I met people who would tell me stories about the ocean. And so by the time I was ready to go to university, I was pretty sure I wanted to be a marine biologist. So my childhood was very free. I had parents who, I was very lucky because my parents never confined us or put us in boxes. I have an older brother, but my parents never said, oh, you can't climb trees because you're a girl, or you can't do that because you're a girl. They said, if you want to do it, do it. If you do what you love, and you'll do it well. And that, I think, was the fundamental thing. And even in school, I felt a lot of freedom around learning. We were encouraged to both study, do academic stuff, but also to do sports so I was a swimmer and a water polo player, and I think that to me, like, I went to ladies college, and that was also a really important part of how I became who I am today. So
yeah. So you said you have all the freedom to choose what you want to do. How did you end up being the marine biologist you wished to be?
So that was also, definitely the fundamental ingredient is that I had parents who were open-minded, but also trusted that I knew what was best for my life. So they never told me what I needed to become or who I needed to be. They believed that if they supported me and guided me, I would find that person. And I think that was really the most important thing for me. And then, I fell in love with water. I was a swimmer and water polo player, but beyond that, I didn't grow up going to the beach all the time. But it was just the stories I heard and the things I knew of the ocean, I think created intrigue. And I thought, wow, like, to everyone it's a big blue tank of water, but I want to see what's within it, right? And I want to see this magic kingdom. And I want to go where no one else will go and see what no one else will ever see. So that was sort of a driving force. And so, I did my first degree in marine biology because I knew that's what I wanted. And then it was a sequence of events that led me down this path towards, the research on blue whales that I do, and then now broadening out to sperm whales, but also general marine conservation in Sri Lanka and a whole lot of other things that are related.
You had as I mentioned before, you had the full freedom to be who you are, the one you wanted to be.
Yeah.
What were the challenges and questions you faced when you start to reach your goal?
Yeah, so I mean, definitely, just having that freedom doesn't mean that it all works out, right? So you still have a lot of hurdles to climb and stuff like that. So for me, I would say, I came from a country that when I told people I want to be a marine biologist, everyone was like, so Puta, what will you do? right? And to me, that was a weird question because I was like, this is an island, there's marine everywhere, so why wouldn't you do this? But it didn't really exist as a career when I wanted to start doing it. And so there was a lot of assumptions about the fact that I would go abroad to study because I couldn't study it here, but I wouldn't come back. And I always wanted to serve Sri Lanka. To me, like serving your own country is, I think, the biggest honor you can ever have. And so for me, that was always there, you know. I even, like, sometimes now even people will turn and say, but it's a man's job. And I'll be like, you don't have to be any particular gender to care for something. And what I'm doing is caring for a common space, right? And the ocean is a common resource. It is actually the responsibility of every person on the planet to look after it. But the vast majority don't, right? So people like myself, we take it upon ourselves to look after it. So why does it matter whether I'm a man or a woman, right? There's also, coming from a developing country, it can be really hard to break out into the bigger picture of marine conservation, the community. Because, if the country doesn't have a tradition of doing good science, then people just expect that you're just another, you have a dream and it's not going to last. And so I struggled a lot with that. I had people who were constantly either trying to take over my research and say, oh, we'll do it for you, like outside researchers, because they could see that what I'd found was exciting and interesting, and they wanted to lead the work. And I was like, no, this is what I found, and I'm going to make sure that it's a homegrown Sri Lankan institution that runs it and does this work. And so I was very passionate about that. And so these are the kinds of hurdles, so not just locally, not just gender, but also it depends on where you come from. But at the end of the day, I have to say that those challenges are exactly what make the journey more interesting. Because if my story was that I woke up in the morning, I went to school, I finished my degree, I became a marine biologist, nobody would care about my story, right? But people care because everyone faces hurdles, everyone faces challenges, and everyone wants to believe that they can too. And by letting people know that I have had all these challenges and I'm still going through challenges, but I can still do it, I hope that it inspires other people to believe that they can manage to do whatever they dream as well.
Yeah, so interesting. And you are the pioneer of blue whale research within Northern Indian Ocean. Let's talk about that project as well. Yeah.
So that project all started, the idea for the project started in about 2003. I was working on a whale research vessel that had come from the US. I managed to get onto it. There's a whole story behind that. But anyway, I managed to get onto it. I was the only local scientist on board, but actually I got on as a deckhand. So my primary job was cleaning toilets and polishing brass. Okay. But it didn't matter to me because I just needed to get on the boat, and I knew that once I got on the boat, then I can just prove that I can be a scientist. So my beginnings are not as glamorous as everyone imagines, and it's important for people to know that. Then I started off, and I was on this expedition of Yala, and basically I saw this aggregation of blue whales, and then I saw a pile of whale poop, which everyone knows I have a big fascination with. And at that point I realized that these whales were feeding in our waters, which we don't expect because normally these large whales go to cold places to feed because the water is more productive. But Sri Lanka water is, so warm, it's the equator, right? So then I was like, okay, this is weird. I mean, we know they should be breeding and calving, but they shouldn't be feeding here. But the fact that they're, pooping or defecating means that they are feeding somewhere close. And so that was sort of my eureka moment. But it took me 5 years after that to start the project because, again, I was writing to researchers abroad because I didn't have people I could ask these questions from locally because, again, this field didn't exist. So I wrote to researchers abroad and I said, look, I found this and I think it's really interesting. Can you support me? And they would say, oh, great, get a research permit and we'll do the work. And I was like, no. So for 5 years, I worked at a conservation agency, saved up my money. Then I started going out on boats, just looking at the whales and talking to tourists about, this is the start of the tourism. So talking to tourists about what I saw in exchange for time on the boats. And then, so then my concerns were, my first question was, they're not supposed to be feeding here, so how are they feeding here? Like, how does the environment influence their behavior? Because I realized that they weren't actually leaving our waters, or they were sticking around in the northern Indian Ocean. So why were they here? What are they feeding on? What are the threats? How unique are they? And these are all the questions that have sort of driven my research up to date.
So as far as you understand, what are the threats reported for the whales?
So the blue whales here, they face a number of threats. The primary threat that they face is ship strike. So they get hit by ships and they get killed. And that's an issue that I've been working on for 7 years now. So for a while. And it is what we would say is a population level threat, because if an animal gets hit, it more than likely will die, right? So that impacts the number of individuals in the population. There are other threats like entanglement, so they can get entangled in fishing gear that's just floating at sea. Blue whales can typically break out of these nets because they're quite big, but we do see some that are still have got a net wrapped around them, and that's problematic, obviously, because they can either drown because they can't come up to the surface if they're entangled close to the bottom, or they can be at the surface and they can't dive for food because they're too buoyant, because they've got all these buoyancy devices attached. And then there's the problem of harassment. So the whale watching industry, which isn't managed, and it's just there's a lot of space to improve that industry. It's an industry that's here to stay. It is a major income earner, but if we want it to be an income earner into the long term, then we do need to be smart about how exactly we're interacting with these species in these places. So those are some of the major threats that we see here, but certainly there are other threats like, we talk about plastics being a problem in other places. We've never really looked for it here as an issue because we don't necessarily have access to the stranded whales. So that would be probably another problem, but also noise pollution. So you and I will probably go in the ocean and think, wow, it's so beautiful, it's so meditative. When I dive, I always think, oh, it's so zen and so lovely and colorful. But for animals that see their world with their ears, the ocean is a really noisy place. And the noise levels are increasing because there's more ship traffic. Ship traffic is growing in the oceans. And that has impacts on things like reproductive behaviors, and stuff like that. And there's some really interesting studies that show the impacts of noise and how it impacts their stress levels as well. So these are all big issues that we need to think about.
So with all these threats, can you give us a brief overview of the current marine vertebrate population in the northern Indian Ocean?
Yeah, so in general, like we have, say, around Sri Lanka, if you focus on cetaceans, with these whales and dolphins. In fact, if you look at marine mammals, which is whales, dolphins, and sirenians, so sirenians are dugongs, we have about, I'm trying to think off the top of my head, it's about 23 species, I think, that we've listed and confirmed that they've been seen. But we do, I think Sri Lanka is like a gold mine. I think the waters around us are so understudied, we don't really know fully what's out there. 2 or 3 years ago, we discovered a new species to our waters, a whale that was 30 feet long, right? So, the fact that we're finding things that big, there's obviously a lot of small things that we are not seeing, right? Or not looking for, unfortunately. So we have lots of sharks, we have, mobula rays. We have I should stop there, because in terms of sharks and mobula rays, or what we call manta rays, most of the time you see them dead at markets, because they are caught for either the shark fin to export for the shark fin soup trade, or with mantas and stuff, they take the gill rakers for the Chinese medicinal market, and there's no real controls on that. So how much of that we have, we don't understand. We do have fish species, we have, it's a pretty healthy ecosystem, and there's still a lot for us to discover.
So in such a context, you pioneered in starting Sri Lanka's first marine conservation research and education organization, that's Oceanwell.
Yeah.
Oceanswell. So what is the role of this organization in tackling all these things?
Okay, so Oceanswell is now, I would say our main project is obviously the Sri Lankan Blue Whale project, where so let's say ocean swell, we do marine conservation research and education, right? So all our research is focused on conservation questions. So at the end of the day, when I'm asking a question and I go out there and I'm doing research, I'm like, okay, how does it apply to conservation, and how can I use it to try to push conservation and drive conservation? So with our work with the blue whales, we also work at the policy level, right? So we take the work, we do the science, we then talk about it in public, we make sure that it's out there, we talk to media, we get people to understand what's going on, we want people to be excited about the oceans, so that's another big thing that we are engaged in. And then at the other side, we go to the government and we say, look, here are the problems, here are the solutions, this is what you can do to help our marine environment, help our marine species, right? So we do work at multiple levels, that's really important. And then there's the education component as well, where we look at building sort of programs for different levels of different age groups. So we don't just do public talks, but I believe in building capacity and skill for the next generation. And so, for example, last year we ran a workshop alongside with National Geographic. We had a grant seminar where we introduced the kinds of projects that are being done by National Geographic explorers. So I spoke, and two colleagues from Hong Kong and India came and spoke, talking about the exciting work they do. And then we ran a skills building workshop where we, taught emerging scientists skills like how do you write a grant, how do you take great photographs for your social media to promote your conservation work, how do you use social media appropriately for conservation impact, how do you prepare for field work. So those are kinds of skills that we want to also teach more of. And then we also just launched the Sri Lankan sperm whale project, so we're kind of trying to do some research around another big species as well. We have some other exciting projects lined up, so once those come through, we'll be expanding. So all of it is very marine conservation related, and also very much about action on the ground. So whether it's action by providing skills and training and information and knowledge to people to go out and be their best selves, or if it is us going to the government and pushing to try to create change, it's all about action.
So with that, I feel that there's a lot of things discovered now than your time.
Yeah.
So can you explain the scope of a marine biologist in a tropical island like Sri Lanka?
Yeah, my gosh, our scope is huge. So before I started, everyone was like, what's the scope in Sri Lanka? And to me, I thought it was a weird question because, we have 8 times more ocean area than land area, okay? Which is huge. And there's a lot of things. So you can, marine biology is a massive field. You can work with things like whales, you can work in conservation, you can work with coral reefs or fish or sharks, large species. You can work with fisheries, looking at sustainability of fisheries. You can look at things like, how do we communicate stories about our oceans better? That's also what a marine biologist would do, because you have the science, and how do you tell those stories? I have friends who are marine biologists who focus on building media in terms of films about the ocean. It's a massive, it has massive scope, and even a marine biologist can work in the social sciences side of things and look at how does all of this stuff that's going on in the oceans affect livelihoods. So some of our research actually does look at communities and how what's going on in the ocean is impacting communities. So and you know, as a marine biologist, you can help people who are working in environmental law. So to me, marine conservation is a massive field, and I like to tell people that it's very inclusive. So no matter what your background, if you have a knowledge about the marine biology or the ocean or conservation, you have a role to play. So you don't have to have a degree in it to make a change. You can come from any background, you can create change, and I think that's really important to know.
So with that, what have you done so far to enliven the next generation to take up this work like you and reach their dreams and goals?
So that's a good question to ask the next generation, because I know there's a lot of people who are really excited, but what I can say from what I know is that there's more people today than ever before who want to do marine biology. And that to me is incredibly exciting, right? So I mentor a lot of students, I'll talk to them. A lot of kids now I know are going to university to do marine biology. They're asking me where they can learn, so we're also building courses that can cater to that need. and that to me is like a very, like a big like win, because I think, wow, like people are seeing that you don't have to just be a doctor, lawyer, engineer, or a business person, but you can be a marine biologist and you can do amazing things and really contribute to the planet, which I think is really exciting. But I also have students who write to me who will watch the work that we do, the media and stuff. They'll learn new things, or I have school kids who are writing projects about, you know, the kind of work we do. So they're impacted at the young age, which is really nice. And I think also the next generation, you know, we bring skills, we bring, you know, we are building projects and creating spaces for them to learn more about the field and be part of bigger projects. So that is also something that I feel we're contributing. We're just trying to make marine conservation something that everyone gets a taste of, can get a taste of. You don't have to actively work in it. Once again, we want to create opportunities for people from different backgrounds, or within their background, help them to understand how they can be a part of that, the larger kind of voyage that we're on.
Yeah. So in 2018, that means last year, the BBC recognized you as one of the most influential 100 people in the world. So while honoring you, the special attention has been paid to about your studies. Let's recall about that as well.
Yeah, so I mean, you know, 2018 was a huge year for me. I got more awards than I've ever got in my entire life that year. And, you know, the biggest, obviously, the culmination of all of that was that BBC named me one of the most inspirational and influential women in the world, one of the 100, which is a massive honor. You know, what I always remind people, though, is that like, last year was just the culmination of many decades of work, right? So I wasn't being celebrated for something that happened overnight. The celebrations happened because of every decision I've made from the time I was a child, right, to come to this point. And the work that I do and my dedication, perhaps the passion that I have for what I do, because I genuinely love what I do. And the other thing I want people to know is that I don't work for the award. So like my goal is not to win awards. I'm always surprised when I get an email or a letter and they're like, you know, we want to, you know, congratulate you, you know, you won this award. I'm like, that's amazing. And it's amazing because it's validation. It reminds me that what I'm doing is right, and it gives you kind of the energy to keep going. But for me, that because my work is not about winning the award. It's a great thing to have, to put, you know, to have it and then to say, okay, that's great, but I still have to keep going. So my journey is very long, and these are just little milestones along the way that help me to remember that I can keep going, that I am making a contribution to the world, because that's my dream, to leave this planet a better place than I found it. So I feel like that's what those awards and like pieces of recognition do, but it doesn't stop my journey, and I'm certainly not going to be retiring anytime soon. I feel like I'm still at the start of my journey, and I have a lot more to go.
So, as a woman or a girl earlier, stepping out of the box and living beyond the boundaries and all the stereotypes that the society puts on you. So what would you say to the budding women scientists of nowadays?
Yeah, so I would say that being a woman, unfortunately, we live in a world where we do have to work harder. Okay, so we're not in a world where it's equal yet.
Yes.
Okay, and I think we all experience that, we all know that. But at the end of the day, what I would say is work hard so that at some point people don't judge you by what your gender is. Right? They're not going to be like, but she's a girl. What they will say is, but she has this skill that is incredibly important if we want to solve this problem. Right? So you start to become a necessity, and that's where you want to be. When I started my career, I can tell you I would go for government meetings, they would listen to me, and I would be the only person with expertise in this subject, and they would look at me, listen to me, and ignore me because I was too young and too female. But I stuck around. I mean, it's been a long journey. I've been very persistent, and I've just hung around and, you know, not left. I didn't let them make me want to leave. That's a key thing. And in the end, now I get calls sometimes from ministers, and they say, you know, we need you because we need to discuss this problem and we need your advice, right? So now it doesn't matter that I'm young or female or anything. what they need is someone to solve their problem. And I have become a necessity. And that is what I say to all girls. I said, work hard. That's okay, right? But get to that point where suddenly the tables turn, and it is amazing. And you still have challenges. I still have challenges, I can tell you that. But it still makes the journey easier. But have faith that it changes. Have faith that you have the capacity to push those boundaries, and you just have to know it might be a long journey, but that's okay. It makes it all the more worthwhile.
And also now you have done a lot of work and you've got to do many things as well. So what are your future plans?
Gosh, my future plans. Every day I have a new future plan or an addition to my future plans. I'm a very experimental person. So one thing is I'm not afraid of failure. So if I come up with a new idea every day, I'll look at how to test it out. If it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. So I do have lots. I'm an idea generator. So I'm like constantly coming up with ideas. But I definitely, for me, like my mission is personally to leave the world a better place than I found it. I want to change the planet. I want to change the trajectory that we're on in my way. If that means empowering a whole new generation of people to believe in themselves, that they can be part of the solution and not just part of the problem, that's a huge thing. I want to drive change locally in Sri Lanka. I want to make sure that we start to value the marine environment. We have never really historically had a relationship with the oceans where people use it as a recreational space, or most people won't swim in Sri Lanka. So that is something that I think is a hindrance to people falling in love with the ocean. So I want to look at ways that we can change that, because I want people to say that we have this incredible ocean around us and there's so much magic that happens, and I want people to just fall in love with it, and that's really important to me. And yeah, at the end of the day, I want to empower that next generation of ocean heroes, and it doesn't matter if you have a long-term plan to be a marine conservationist or not, because I think you can be a marine conservationist no matter what your future job is and your future career. So I just want to I want people from all around the world to believe that they can, and I want to remain visible in the way that I do and tell my personal journey stories, because I think that's exactly what will empower others to also see themselves in me, feel that, well, if she can do it, I can. And I want people to remember I'm just like everyone else. So if I can do it, you can do it, and that's what I want. That's what I want to leave behind. I want everyone to believe that they can.
With that great message, I hope you all gathered a lot of information, a lot of inspiring, cool stuff from ma'am. And thank you very much, Dr. Asha de Vos, for sparing your valuable time on behalf of us to share your incredible knowledge with all of us.
Thank you.